No viewers yet? Oh no. Can't start till my live audience gets here. My TV audience. Well, they're the ones that watch the commercials and pay the bills. Just kidding. Susan's rolling her eyes. She's like, do not go there. That's who pays me and Chuck to teach. All the big money we make. Big money. All right, good morning. Welcome to our continued study on the life of Christ. And I don't know, has it been a year yet? It's getting close. It's been a year, I think. So we're getting close. Real time, life of Christ. We're going to have longer classes towards the end. This is the material I use. Chronological Study of the Life of Jesus by Gene Taylor. Typically, I use that for an outline. I think Chuck does it too. That way we know where to go forward. Since I wasn't here last week, I watched Chuck on YouTube, and I think I picked up in the right spot. Fourfold Gospel. Fourfold Gospel by McGarvey is available online in book form. It's good, and it's kind of. What's that? You had that in college? You know, you dated his grandson, probably. It's been around a while. I think that book's been around about 100 years. It's a good outline. He tried to put stuff in together, and some of that with the gospel gets a little tricky, the timeline on it, to be honest. When I've tried to look at it, it's a little tricky. Padfield's got a lot of stuff, too. I use Kaufman's commentary, and I use Bible Gateway for my scriptures, and I use Study Light for a lot of stuff, too. So anyways, we're in chapter 24 of the book, so this is where we're at right now. So, like I said, it's just all I'm going to talk about today is Jesus prays in Gethsemane. So the class will be longer than his prayer. And I guess the class will not be longer than his prayer because people fell asleep in his prayer. So stay awake. So anyways, it really appears in all four Gospels, although John only requires one verse is all he uses with this. But it's in all four Gospels. And I'll try to work through all that while we're there. So anyways, Matthew 26:36. Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane. He said to his disciples, sit here while I go over there and pray. And in Luke 39:40, the beginning of 40, and when he came out and went, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples followed him. And when he came to the place, and in John 18:1, when Jesus had spoken these words, he went out with his disciples across the brook Kidron, where there was a garden, which he and his disciples entered. So it's got to have been at least 3 weeks that we were inside the upper room, right? Maybe 5 weeks that we were in. Yeah, well, I forgot about them too. That was an extra week in there. So for several weeks, we've been from that Last Supper, the Lord's Supper, the establishment of that. We've been, and Jesus kind of says his farewell in John 15, 16, and 17. So it's kind of what he does there. So we've been in that right now. So they leave. They leave that upper room. They leave that place that was prepared. So where do they go when they leave there? You got 3 verses. About a mile away. Very, very good. I think one of the things said it was a half mile, but who knows, right? Close enough. It was close. So let's do it that way. It's close. Maybe as far as the 4-way stop down here. So not as far as Walmart. So it was close. So these 3 verses do they agree? Do they say the same thing at where they went? Matthew's thing says they went to a place called Gethsemane. Luke's version says they went to the Mount of Olives. And John's version said they crossed the brook Kidron to a garden. Are these all the same place? In the brook of, across the brook Kidron. It's in the Kidron Valley. There you go. It's where Grandma's house is. This is exactly it. The Kidron Valley starts at Jerusalem, right in that area, and then flows out, follows the brook Kidron. It goes at the base of Mount of Olives, Mount Olivet, and Gethsemane is at the base of the Mount of Olives. So yeah, this is the same place, just 3 different ways to say it, okay? So nobody thinks it's otherwise. If you didn't know, Gethsemane means place of oil presses. Why? They grew olive trees on the Mount of Olives. Imagine that. What such a name is that? That's what I read that there are 8 olive trees on the Mount of Olives that are over 1,000 years old currently. And they think that they came from the stock of the olives that were, olive trees that were there in Jesus' time. So it's amazing to have trees that old. They were able to carbon date 3 of them. Some of them were hollow on the inside as they've kind of grown out. So they weren't able to carbon date them. So anyways, that's pretty cool. Wanda, I was sad Wanda wasn't here because she's been there, right? I know she's been to the Holy Land, so I was going to say ask her if she saw that, and I'm sure she did. In Luke 21, verse 37, going back a chapter, every day he was teaching in the temple, but at night he went out and lodged on a mount called Olivet. So you back up a chapter, you see that Jesus went to this garden on a regular basis. This was a place like when he had taught at the temple, each night he went over to this same place. We'll see it in John 18:2 also. This is a place Jesus is known to go. It's a place he's known to frequent. And what I'll really get to at the end of this thing, and I don't get quite to Judas showing up to betray him, but we get to, well, it says that, and that's all I'm going to go to today. Chuck's going to pick up next week. But if he wanted to hide from Judas, would he have gone to a place that he goes regularly? No, right? If you want to hide from somebody to go to the restaurant you always go to, you know, if I stay here long enough, if I go to Waffle House every night, I'm going to run into Doug sometime, right? I would go somewhere else. So he wasn't trying to hide, is what it really gets down to. All right. So what did Jesus plan to do at the Garden of Gethsemane? Pray. Look at that. Nora does it. She didn't have to read the scripture. She knows already. Her first word in class since she's had her throat surgery, and it's pray. I like that. Mark that down. Good woman right there. Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane, Matthew 26:36, and he said to his disciples, sit here while I go over there and pray. In Mark 14:32, they went to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, sit here while I pray. So that was his plan. He was going to go to the garden and pray. There's probably a song about that. Chuck, don't you lead that song? I go to the garden to pray.
Go to the garden alone.
I go to the garden alone.
Yeah.
Did he go alone?
No.
Oh. He took the disciples with him. Yes. And we're going to get to there too. Matthew 26:37-38, and taking with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, he began to be sorrowful and troubled when he said to them, my soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch with me. Mark's version in 14:33-34, and he took with him Peter and James and John and began to be greatly distressed and troubled. And he said to them, my soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here, watch. So he took the disciples. In particular, how many disciples did he take? 3. Okay. Nora says 3.
He took 3 from the group.
He took 3 from the group. So he brings a bigger group and he takes 3 a little farther. A little farther. He's going away from them to go pray. And he takes these 3, Peter, James, and John. That's a little farther. It says disciples. It doesn't really say apostles. Huh?
He really hadn't come to be an apostle because they didn't.
Yeah, they're not really apostles until he dies. You know, until he's resurrected, really. Pentecost, right? You're not really an apostle till then. He picked disciples, but yeah, I guess you're right. A lot of times we think them as the 12. They're also addressed as the 12, even when they're the 11. So it's at least them, probably more. He carried a lot of disciples with him. Sometimes, I think 72 is a common number, and 120, I think sometimes. But who knows? But he takes 3 farther in, Peter, James, and John. What were they going to do? What were these guys going to do?
They were supposed to watch, but they went to sleep.
Oh, they were supposed to watch and they fell asleep.
It's probably like midnight.
It's probably midnight, yeah. They've been, like I said, they were in the upper room. They had the Passover dinner. It's night. And then Jesus talks for 3 chapters. It's after midnight. It's after midnight. When you get farther along, Judas betrays him. Peter, you hear the cock crow 3 times. Probably dawn-ish. So, yeah, this is after midnight. So,
that it's now at this point where he begins to really, he understood it, but to really feel the weight of what he was about to suffer.
he does. You're right.
We'd have been dwelling on it all week. He doesn't do it until just a couple of hours before he's arrested.
Yeah, it's really close. Like I say, it's mere hours before he's arrested, and it says he's sorrowful and he's troubled. He wasn't in the upper room. He tells him he's going to die, but he's not at this state. But it's like I say, he's known, and it gets heavier and heavier. We had a dog that we decided to euthanize, and we thought we'd do the right thing of picking a date and picking a time. That was pretty hard. This is the last time I'll walk him. This is the last time I'll feed him. I think it was actually harder than when it's just time was taken. But but he knows. He knows when this is going to happen, and you feel that distress. You feel that trouble. Yeah, it's tough. You see a lot of difference between Christians and those who don't believe in God, of knowing what happens after that last breath, that peace that comes with the end of time. But he's, it's heavy on him. It's really, really hitting him.
And not speak or open up his eyes, and he took his last breath. It's hard.
Yeah. It's hard. It's hard. He starts seeing it. So why do you think he didn't go alone? Why do you think he didn't go to the garden alone? Why do you take these guys? They didn't go all the way. We'll see. But why do you take these guys? Help strengthen them. Yeah, that's definitely the man part of him. It's not the God part of him, but it is the man part of him. To help strengthen him. He knows what has to happen and what is going to happen. He's sorrowful. He's troubled. I think one of the it says, "My soul is very sorrowful, even to death." I mean, if it was so hard on him that he died right there, or he got in such a low spot that he could die, then the plan wouldn't come through, right? So they may have been there to, if something happens to him, if he's so sorrowful that he can't get up and walk, they won't just leave him there. It is, isn't it? It's the same three that saw the transfiguration. So these guys have been through a lot, and we also know these guys do going forward. Peter on the day of Pentecost, James, they're in Jerusalem, and John, the books that he writes, definitely. These guys carry a big burden going forward. So it's good, and they've seen some of the stuff they've seen.
Was because if you look at the writings, they each heard part of his prayers. So obviously his prayers were out loud. And there was a learning process for them as to the fact that he felt distress. They were going to, it led the pathway for what they're going to also have to face. And they also knew the concern that he is expressing for them as well as for himself. And there's something, if you hear someone over praying a prayer and you're mentioning it, it definitely touches your heart.
I like that. I like that. It is something, they probably overheard that, and they communicate that later in their letters. They're able to communicate it to us 2,000 years later, to see his love, to see his concern, to see those emotions. It's not sterile. That's a nice thing about the Bible. It's not sterile. It's full of, it's got eyewitness accounts. It's got that emotion to it. It's not just somebody's written account from the newspaper or something. I like that. So it's good that, like I say, it's part of it. It's all God breathed, but eyewitness, they pick up different things. They all heard different parts of it. Matthew 26, first part of 37, and going a little farther, he fell on his face and prayed. Mark 14, 35, the beginning. And going a little farther, he fell on the ground and prayed. And Luke 22, 41, he withdrew from them about a stone's throw and knelt down and prayed. So how far away did Jesus go? Susan doesn't throw stones very far. Mickey casts stones at everybody. He lives in a glass house. It's not true. I've seen Mickey throw. So, back in the old days, Mickey could throw a stone half a mile. So, I like that the stone's throw. That's just Midwest jargon. That is something that my mom and dad I've heard them say a million times. Something's a stone's throw away. I think I appreciate language more as an adult, more now than I ever did. All the English classes I had to take, I probably didn't appreciate it at all. But the literature value in the Bible and seeing things like this, a stone's throw, really, it's in there 2,000 years ago. So, I don't know. So he goes a little ways. Susan says he goes a little far enough that they hear him as he prays out loud. So he's not too far. He's far enough but not too far. And like I said, I put all three on there because they're just a little different, but they all exactly the same too. Matthew 26:39, and going a little farther, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, "My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." In Mark 14:35 through 36, and going a little farther, he fell on the ground and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, "Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me, yet not that I will, but that you will." How does Jesus address God in his prayer? The two versions, Matthew's version and Mark's version, are a little bit different. How does he address him in Matthew?
My Father.
My Father. Chuck Edwards. I saw it was the Lord's Prayer, but it wasn't that Lord's Prayer. When he taught the disciples to pray, how's that prayer start out? What we commonly known as Lord's Prayer, Our Father, which is true, right? It's our Father. It's His Father. Here he addresses him as my Father. That's quite an address, I really hadn't thought of myself. I mean, when I prayed, I don't say my Father. I might call him Father. I might call him Lord. With that emphasis on my Father. It's his Father. That's who he's praying to. Father God. How's he address him in the version in Mark? Abba. So he calls on a Swedish group from the 80s, or is it 70s? Calls on them. No, it's not true. So it's Abba Father, Abba Father, Abba. I don't know how to say it. Yeah, he calls him that in the start of the prayer. Abba, I got this from Thayer's lexicon, and Thayer's has been around a long time, but it means father. It means customary. It's a customary title used of God in prayer. That's where you always see it. Whenever he says Abba Father, whenever it occurs in the New Testament, it has the Greek interpretation joined to it, that it is apparently to be explained by the fact that the Chaldee Abba, through frequent use in prayer, gradually acquired the nature of a most sacred, proper name, to which the Greek-speaking Jews added the name from their own tongue. So from the Chaldeans, it was just kind of used, the Jews would use it in their prayers. They would address God as Abba, which is a Chaldee word. But as the Greeks went to Greek, they would add the Greek Father, so it's Abba, Father. But it says it's his most sacred, proper name, and it's only used in prayer. I hadn't heard that before. I'd always heard it addressed a little differently. But it makes sense, right? I mean, if you're going to, in the state that he was in, the sorrow that he was in, feeling the weight of what was about to happen, would you use anything less than the most sacred name for God? Because since it's Mark, not Matthew, because Mark wrote it to Gentiles, right? He had a Greek, yeah. So that makes sense. Like you said, with Mark, it would be a little different. Mark's got a Greek background. He writes to the Romans. He writes to the Gentiles, with the Roman background. So they understand that power, and they understand that hierarchy. So he addresses them doesn't address them as, "Hey, Dad." He addresses us Almighty God. The God is how he addresses him. Matthew 26, 30, I never address my dad like that. I work with dad all the time, but he's just dad, I don't ever say, hey, boss man, I never do it that way. So Matthew 26, 39, and going a little farther, same verse, but he says, if it be possible, and in Mark's version it says, if it were possible, Mark 14, 35 through 36. Aren't all things possible with God? You do. He knows it's going to happen. You're right. You see the human side. You have to see the human side. He has to have both parts there. It's not, this is the human side. He starts out with his prayer. If it's possible, take this away from me. If there's another way, and it's heavy, and it's but if there's another way, is there another way? No. So although all things are possible, this is the one. It's not possible to find another way. If it was possible, of course, for God to take away the cross, but to have done so would have been, it is possible, but to have done so would have taken salvation away from humanity. The dreadful soul-shaking truth is that not even God could redeem man without the sacrifice of himself in the person of Christ to pay the penalty of man's redemption. That comes from Kaufman. But that's basically it. He could take it away, but then there's no redemption. So to have redemption, to follow through with the plan that was set before time, it's got to happen. So that's where it's at. Why would Jesus ask to avoid the cross? What brought him into harmony with God's will, and what gave him the strength to endure the humiliation and temptation? I'll ask all three questions at the same time. Why would he ask to avoid the cross? And Chuck answered that. It's his human side, right? None of us want to be hurt. None of us want to be tortured to death. No, I don't want to be tortured to death in front of mom, naked. That's not, nobody wants to sign up to that at all. So what brings him into harmony with God's will? His love for his father, I like that. That's a good love for his father, love for humanity. I mean, that's really what puts this all in place. Love, trust, and obedience. There's love for God's will. There's love for him being the Father God. The trust that this is not the end. The trust that the plan's going to go through. He's not just going to die there. The obedience. This is the plan. This is the plan you came to earth for 33 years ago. This is the plan. The obedience. Prayer. I mean, he's talking to God. I think that helps change him too. I mean, he's in a hard sudden place. This is all what else can he do, right? Yeah, right. Yeah, he answered prayer. The answer is no, it's not possible. It's his love that gives him the strength, love for God, humanity, obedience, all that. So it gives him that strength to get through for the next. What's that?
I said he knew, to use a phrase, he knew the long game.
He knew the long game.
He knew where he was going to be in 3 days.
Yeah. I might look stupid now. And this is a very heavy burden to carry, but I know where this is going. And that's, I think that is. It's part of his prayer right there too. Yet not that I will, but what you will. I know the end game. I know how this works out. And I know you're going to carry it through. Anybody ever play crocodile dentist? You ever had one of those? Kids never had one of those? Mickey, Sandy? The crocodile dentist, the crocodile, it's like a full sword, it's got teeth, and you touch one of the teeth, and it drops down, you touch another tooth, and it drops down. No? You touch the infected tooth and the crocodile bites you. You've never played this crocodile dentist game? My kids had one of these things. Okay, anyway. That's why they call me, I'm all right now. Yeah, that's right. It's one of those, as dumb as that little game is, and it doesn't hurt, it was always like, I hope I picked the right tooth. And, but, this is nothing compared to what Jesus is going through. So why does Jesus use this cup? If it's possible, let this cup pass from me. Remove this cup from me. Is that a weird word? Weird place? Why cup? What's the first thing that hits your mind? Lord's Supper, Susan says. That's the first thing that always hits my mind, and probably as I've looked at it 100 times, I've always kind of thought of it because it does remember his death, it remembers his suffering. That's where my mind would first go. This cup, according to Thayer, is a metaphor for it's your lot, your experience, whether it's joyous, adverse, divine appointments, whatever, favorable, unfavorable, likened to a cup which God presents one to drink. So prosperity or adversity. So basically, it's a metaphor. We use metaphors today. A lot of just be a metaphor at that time. And it symbolizes God giving a cup of your fate. So it had been his fate handed to him. So if this fate, if you can remove my fate from me, but he can't. He can't remove that fate. So. Luke 22, 43 through 44, and there appeared to him an angel from heaven, strengthening him. Being in agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. Only Luke's account includes this, so those 4 accounts. How do you think the angel strengthened Jesus? An angel shows up. Usually when you see angels, people are scared to death. Praying could be, some kind of a spiritual strengthening, Hey, God's will has to happen, and we need him, Can there be an intervention like that? Yeah, they were at the tomb. Yeah. Yeah, don't forget. This is real. This is what I see. This is where you're going. Exactly. He could have done that. The angel could have brought that message. I just came from there, and it's ready, and it's going to get bigger, and the kingdom is going to, yeah, he could do that. I like that. I coach soccer, as a lot of you know. My team right now are 10 and 11-year-olds. Sometimes I have to remind them of what can happen and how to make things happen. The ball actually has to go in the goal to win a soccer game. I know that sounds like an amazing thing, but they forget sometimes. But reminder. And when you say it, light bulb goes on. Oh yeah, that's what I got to do. So, and it's just a thing simple. They could have physically strengthened him too.
Arms around you and says, I know I can't fix it, but I am going to be here with you. We're all going to be with you.
Yeah.
And just that encouragement. Because it goes right back to praying, but it's just something about that touch. Somebody from home. Remember, Shepherd is his home. It's come down and made the effort to not just stand there and talk to him, but hug him and let him know that you are loved and we're pulling for you.
I like that. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, he's from home, really, and he could be there just to encourage him, to be with him, to hold him, hug him, whatever. Being married to a social worker, I've learned over 23 years. Don't try to solve problems, because some problems can't be solved, but listen to them and absorb that, and I'll give you that. In Matthew 4, right after Jesus' temptation, the angels ministered to Jesus too. When the devil left him, behold, angels came and were ministering to him. So it could be a physical strengthening in and of itself too, and however that works. So all that, I think it's all possible. This account also talks about Jesus sweating blood. Anybody here ever sweat blood? No, I haven't either. So, it's possible. It's something that happens with, I know, extreme stress. Little blood vessels pop and stuff, and you sweat. You can sweat blood. Apparently, it is very, very extreme, very uncommon, but enough agony on him that he sweat blood. Says the sweat drops fell to the ground. What part of your body? What part of his body do you think these sweat drops came from? From the brain, the face. I would say so. A guy that's praying, he's probably bent over like that, and his drops would be, at least the eyes or something, would probably be where it's most likely to come from. So, yeah. Yeah. It's very visual, isn't it? It's a very, yeah. Yeah, I've wiped sweat out of my eyes many, many times. Sweat's also part of the curse on Adam brought about by sin. And the sweat of his face, we might eat the bread of life, was Matthew Henry's words. But in Genesis 3, verse 19, the curse on Adam, by the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, and for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. So I never looked at it this way, but this is also a possibility. But the sweat of his face, he had to sweat to eat, to work it. At the same time, it could be somewhat a relationship to this too. As the problem, as he starts taking on the sin, stress of that, so that we can eat the bread of life. Matthew 26, 40 through 41, and he came to the disciples and found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, so, could you not watch me 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. In Mark's version in 14, 37 through 38, and he came and found them sleeping, and he said to Peter, Simon, are you asleep? Could you not watch 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. So when Jesus comes back from that stone's throw away, he finds the disciples doing what? Sleeping. Cool, right? Did he expect that? Would you expect that? No? Yeah. They didn't know that. Yeah, they don't see the urgency. They don't know how close it is. Like I said, they're wore out. It's been a tough week. And they got some important stuff about knowing that Christ's going to die. Peter's going to reject him. Judas is going to betray him. It's been a tough week. It's after midnight. It ain't like the, Mardi Gras or anything. I mean, the town's probably pretty dead at that time. Susan? Yeah. For those of us not used to sitting still, it hits. It hits me on a regular basis. And I think some of it is, like that, you teach class and there's a letdown after some of that stuff too. Yeah. And sometimes as thoughts get to you and you start thinking about that, you close your eyes maybe a little bit to think and process it as it applies to your life. I mean, have you ever ended a prayer with Z's instead of amen? Yeah, they heard part of what he said.
You find that some heard more than others because some give you more information. So they stayed awake longer. But eventually,
Yeah.
they fell asleep.
Eventually, they fell asleep. They just did. Did this help his agony? I brought my buddies along with me, and I expect them to carry on this, and they're asleep. They're not bearing his agony, I don't think.
Feel even more alone.
Even more alone. I would think he feels more alone.
Still don't understand.
They don't get it. So how do you think he spoke to him? Sarcasm? You know, so you couldn't even watch me for 1 hour. It was 1 hour. Come on, could you not? Was it sarcasm? Was it gentleness? You know, I know you're tired. I know this is tough, but you know, I need you here. I need you to stay awake. I understand your spirit's willing, but your flesh is weak. Or did he scream at him? Like, you know, I'm not going to scream. But anyway, how do you think he did this? How do you think, we don't get this part of it. It was loud enough to wake him up.
Talking to kids sometimes when you start out, you're like, what were you thinking?
Yeah.
Then you back off and say, did you realize I stayed up all night worrying about you? And here's why. But the first initial thing is, I'm getting your attention.
You know, that's probably,
When you get in, the spirit is willing, but he
what are you
Yeah.
thinking? Can you not stay awake? I know you're tired. I know, but this is a serious situation. Stay awake. Don't enter into temptation. Watch and pray. They don't know what temptation is coming for them. You might be right. It might be start out with that shout and then change tone. What temptation? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. What temptation is he worried about for them? They're going to show a lot of weakness. Only John shows up. It's short and long. Yeah, I'll say short and long. I mean, like I say, at the cross, only John's there, and they all fear for their own lives. The temptation is they worry once he goes away till the day of Pentecost. And it's like, now what? You know? Now what? Temptation. We talk about Saul being the chief of all sinners because the church was small and he could have destroyed it if he wasn't up against God. Same thing with them. Before there was a church, there was the 11. And if their temptation was to run like crazy, there wouldn't have been anything. Whose spirit is willing but the flesh is weak? Is it the disciples? Is it Jesus? Or is it us? Susan says yes. Carla? Us? All above? I think it's all the above. Spirit, huh? Humanity in general, yeah. Disciples, their spirit's willing. They want to stay awake. And they want to be there, but man, they can't. Jesus, you see it in his prayer. You know, the humanity of him is us. We already know, right? Luke 22, 45 through 46. When he rose from prayer, he came to the disciples and found them sleeping for sorrow. And he said to them, "Why are you sleeping? Rise and pray that you may not enter temptation." Luke's version says they were sleeping because of sorrow. I can believe that too. Matthew 26, 42. Again, for the second time, he went away and prayed, "My Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done." Why does he repeat his prayer? Is it different from the first one? This first prayer says, "If it be possible, let this cup pass." The second one says, "If this cannot pass." So there's like, if this can happen, and then it's like, if this can't happen. There's a little minor difference. Same thought, though. Same thought. You're right. It's exactly the same thought. Well, you can see his progression in there of, you know, is there another way? And this is more like, I know there's not really another way. You know, you can see kind of a progression in that positive to the negative. Matthew 26, 43, and again he came and found them sleeping. Oh no, we didn't know that part of the story, did we? Yeah, we knew. For their eyes were heavy. Imagine that. How did Jesus find the disciples after the second prayer? They were asleep. That'd be the proper answer would be zzz, nobody answers. Why are they unable to stay awake? Their eyes were heavy, of course, right? Very strong emotions attended the Last Supper, the identification of the traitor, contemplation of Christ's death, also the crowded events of the entire week had left them physically and emotionally exhausted. For their eyes were heavy shows that the strain under which they had arrived at a dark hour. That's Kaufman's words. It applies. Verse 44 of Matthew 26. So leaving them again, he went away a stone's throw and prayed for the third time, saying the same words again. Think he prayed the same prayer, or do you think he changed it a little bit? I think it's the same idea, but I think he progresses. It's hard to tell. We don't have it prayer. Alfred Plummer suggests that he might even lost the if and says, since this cup can't pass from me, thy will be done. It could be. It might not be. But he's not saying the same prayer once behind another, saying it 100 times. He might have the same thought, but he goes back with space. As it affects his mind, it probably is a little different. Verse 45 of Matthew 26, then he came to the disciples and said to them, sleep, take your rest later on. See, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Matthew 14:41, Mark. And he came to the third time and said to them, are you still sleeping and taking your rest? It is enough. The hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. So the third time, and the disciples were asleep. What's he telling them to do? He basically tells them, let's go. He says, sleep, you're going to get your sleep later. But it's getting close here. And it's time. They didn't sleep long. The next verse, in the same sentence, basically. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand. It's that quick. He tells them, back here, sleep, the hour's at hand, it's getting close. At the end of the sentence, never mind. He's here. It's for whom the bell tolleth. Me, it is me. Jesus wasn't trying to avoid Judas. Judas shows up. He already knew. He's not trying to avoid the betrayer. He's not trying to avoid the cup. John 18:2. This is where Chuck will pick up next week. Now Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place, for Jesus often met there with the disciples. Judas shows up there. He shows up with a band of armed guards and such to arrest Jesus. So that's where he's at. He didn't try to hide. He didn't try to avoid it. Although his prayer might sound like, is there another way? He knew there wasn't another way. He was where he could be found and ready for Judas when he came. So that's where we'll pick up next week. Jesus will be betrayed, arrested, and forsaken.